The first lash didn't land on her back. It landed on her breath. Maeve's mouth snapped open, but no sound came out. The second came harder, slicing through the back of her dress and skin in one clean arc that stole the air from the crowd. Sheriff Dawes didn't blink. Neither did the pastor. Neither did the mayor's wife, who had led the petition. They all stood in a tight half-circle around the whipping post in the middle of Carson's Crossing, a town so proud of its laws that it carved them into the oak gallows out back. For moral contagion, someone had whispered, for consorting with a savage. But Maeve didn't move. She didn't plead. She didn't even cry. She only locked her eyes on the tree line beyond the livery, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Her wrists were bound, her dress in tatters, her body trembling but upright. Someone threw a stone. It missed. Another followed. It didn't. When they were done, she collapsed to her knees. The post held her up like a puppet. A little girl crept forward and placed a rag near her hand. Maeve didn't move. That night she was left in the dust, bleeding, bones bruised, barely able to crawl. No one came to help. Not the women who had once bought her pies, not the boys she'd taught to read. No one wanted to be seen with the Indians' whore. Only at dawn did she stir, half-conscious, dragged herself to the creek, and lay face down in the water just to feel something. The man they had punished her for loving. He was gone. Left without a word 3 nights earlier. Some said he was an Apache scout, others said outlaw. Most just called him Danger. But Maeve had called him by name. That was her crime. And now that name was ash on her tongue. Still she whispered it as the sun rose. Kohana. The breeze shifted. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, and in the village he had once left behind, Kohana stirred from sleep, his heart pounding as if someone had called him home across a great distance he had no memory of crossing. Kohana stood barefoot outside his uncle's lodge, the morning wind tangling his braids as the firelight behind him flickered across the red clay walls. His people had welcomed him back with few words, an extra bowl at the fire, a place to sleep, a nod from his grandmother. But he knew what they truly thought. That he had let the world of white men stain him. That he had gone too far, stayed too long, returned hollow. But now his pulse beat with an old rhythm, older than shame, older than language. He couldn't name the feeling yet, only that it began the moment he woke from the dream of a woman screaming his name, not with fear, but with grief. Maeve. He hadn't said her name in 3 days, hadn't dared. He had left her because the pressure from both sides had grown unbearable. The town whispering filth behind her back, the elders accusing him of betrayal. He thought leaving would protect her. But now, as he crouched beside the river to splash water on his face, something sharp struck his ribs. Guilt, not fear, not doubt, but guilt, because leaving hadn't saved her. It had damned her. His cousin asked if he was staying through the winter. Kohana shook his head. There's something I left behind. There's nothing worth going back for, the man said. But Kohana didn't answer. He mounted a horse by noon, didn't ask permission, didn't explain, just rode, with only a pouch of dried roots and a carved eagle feather tied at his hip. He rode through the Copper Canyon, past the place where they'd once danced at night, barefoot in the river shallows, her laughter tucked into his memory like a firefly in a jar. He remembered the way she said his name differently than anyone else, softer, almost like prayer. He didn't know what he'd find. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe she hated him now. Maybe it was too late. But if she was still standing, even barely, he'd find her. He'd speak her name where they had silenced it, and he'd ask for her, Not with shame, not with apology, but with the dignity he should have offered before. As he crossed into the valley, storm clouds rolled overhead, and still he didn't stop. Not this time. Maeve hadn't been seen in town since the whipping, but word spread like rot through a barrel of peaches. She was still alive. Someone claimed they saw her limping behind the chapel before dawn. Others swore she was sleeping in the abandoned granary. Nobody checked. Nobody helped. Except one. His name was Eli, and he was 10 years old, half white and half something else, the something no one ever said out loud. He lived with a drunk uncle and didn't speak much, but when he saw Maeve crawl into the alley behind Mrs. Kettering's bakery, he didn't run. He just knelt beside her and held out a crust of bread like he'd done it 100 times. Maeve didn't reach for it. Her hands were still too swollen to close. So he fed her in silence, broke the crust into pieces, and placed each one against her lips. When he smiled, it cracked open a fresh wound on his mouth. Someone had hit him recently, and hard. "They said you were dead," he whispered. Maeve didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat felt like it had been lined with thorns, but her eyes softened. And in that look, something passed between them. Not pity, not even kindness, but a quiet recognition. She had nothing. He had even less. But both had been struck for loving what the town hated. That night, Eli returned with a blanket stolen from the church pew. He covered her. Maeve tried to speak, but he only said, "Don't worry. I don't tell secrets." Then he was gone. By the time dawn broke again, the bakery woman found footprints, and Maeve had vanished again. But the child kept coming back, every day, same alley. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. Sometimes just a mark in the dust where she'd slept. On the 5th day, he found her crouched behind the old livery, shaking. "They're saying he's coming back," Eli said. "The one you loved, the Apache." Her breath hitched. She wanted to ask who. She wanted to ask how he knew, but the only word that came was a whisper. "Kohana?" Eli nodded. "They say he's near. They say he's looking for you." Maeve looked down at her raw hands, her bruised arms, her ruined dress, and for the first time in days, she felt something dangerous flicker in her chest. Hope. He rode in at sunrise, quiet as smoke, with no fanfare and no weapon raised. Just a single rider, dust-covered, back straight, eyes forward. The townsfolk noticed him before he even crossed the threshold, because you couldn't not notice Kohana. His face was carved with the kind of dignity that didn't bend, not even under 30 stares. He wore no white man's coat, no apology stitched into his clothes. Just leather, beads, and a strip of red cloth tied at his wrist, one that Maeve had once used to tie back her hair. The town froze. Blacksmith stopped mid-swing. The baker dropped a tray. The pastor's daughter turned pale. He dismounted slowly, tying his horse near the same post where Maeve had been beaten. No one spoke. The sheriff stepped forward, hand on his gun, trying to sound calm. "You've got no business here." Kohana didn't look at him. His eyes scanned the buildings, the alleyways, the faces. He was searching. "She's not here," the sheriff added, "and even if she was, you'd have no right." That made Kohana turn. He spoke only 4 words. "I've come to ask." The crowd muttered. Ask for what? For whom? There were no laws to cover what he was implying. No permission granted to a man like him to ask for anything. But Kohana stood firm. The sheriff puffed up. "You gonna marry her? Raise half-breeds in my town?" The word hit like a slap, but Kohana didn't flinch. "I came to take her where she's wanted." "She's not wanted here either." "Then we agree," Kohana said softly. That night Maeve sat curled beneath the livery awning, trembling from fever, unaware that the man she still dreamed of had arrived. Eli found her, pressing his hands against her cheeks to wake her. "He's here," the boy whispered. "He's looking for you." Her breath caught. What?" "He said your name, in front of all of them." Maeve didn't believe it until she smelled the horse on the wind, until she heard the hush fall over the square, until she peeked through the slats and saw him, standing where they broke her, eyes searching the shadows. Her knees buckled. But before she could move, Eli whispered again, "Do you want me to take him to you?" She didn't answer. She only nodded once, and the boy took off running. Eli found him standing beside the whipping post, where the town's cruelty had soaked into the soil and silence weighed heavier than stone. Kohana said nothing when the boy approached, only looked down, then lower, noticing the bruises along Eli's arm like ink stains from some long-forgotten punishment. The boy didn't explain. He just pointed toward the edge of town and whispered, "She's not far. But she's not whole." Kohana followed without question. They moved behind stores and under fences, Eli leading him as if guiding a man to a sacred grave, careful not to be seen, until they reached the back of the livery where a collapsed stall held its breath. Maeve lay slumped against a crate, her face pale and raw, fever shadowing her cheeks, lips split from thirst. Her dress was torn, her hair knotted with blood, but she was still herself, still more woman than anyone had allowed her to be. Kohana dropped to his knees. "Maeve," he said, like it was the first and last word he ever wanted to speak. Her eyes opened slowly. Recognition bloomed like a wound behind her gaze. "You came back," she rasped. Kohana nodded, fighting the shame in his chest. "I came to ask." Her face twitched, confused. "Ask?" "Not for forgiveness, not for your body," he said. "I came to ask for a place beside you, if there's anything left to offer." She closed her eyes. "I'm not something to be rescued." "I know," he said. "That's why I won't lift you. I'll sit with you here, if that's what you want." The silence between them filled with breath and dust. Eli turned away, pretending not to watch, his hands clenched against his ribs. Kohana slid his cloak off his shoulders and wrapped it around her gently, as if touching flame. "Can you walk?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not tonight." "Then I'll wait," he said, "until morning, or longer." And so he did. He sat beside her in the straw, legs crossed, hands folded in his lap, never asking her to move, never speaking unless she did. Outside, the boy kept watch, small and still. Inside, the fire between two broken souls flickered without sound. And the town, sensing something had shifted, didn't dare come close. By morning, Maeve could sit without falling. Her fever hadn't broken, but her mind had sharpened just enough to remember the last thing she'd held on to: Kohana's name. She turned toward him, still wrapped in his cloak, still surrounded by the straw where he had kept vigil all night. He hadn't slept. His eyes were open, trained on the world beyond the slats, waiting not for trouble but for the first sign of mercy. She tried to speak but coughed instead, and he was at her side before her breath came back. "Don't rush," he said, the words warm against the bruises on her temple. "The world will wait." But Maeve shook her head slowly. "They won't," she said. "They'll know you're here. They'll come." "Let them," Kohana replied. "I have no fear of men who hide behind laws." "You should," she whispered. "They buried your name. They burned the letters from my door. They told me I was nothing." Kohana touched her face with fingers that trembled. "You were never nothing. You were the only thing I remembered clearly when I left." The boy, Eli, emerged from behind a wall of hay, clutching a dented tin cup full of water. He handed it to Maeve, who drank slowly, every swallow a fight. "There's talk," he muttered. "At the general store. They're saying you're still here, that he's got you, that they'll ride tonight." Kohana stood, back straight, eyes cold. "Then they can ride, but I'll be waiting." Maeve reached for his hand. "Don't fight them." "I won't," he said, "but I won't leave you again either." Eli looked between them, something flickering in his small, bruised face. "If you leave now, you might make it. There's a wagon trail that cuts behind the hills. I can show you." "No," Maeve said, voice hoarse but steady. "I've been running my whole life. I won't anymore." The boy swallowed hard. "Then what will you do?" Kohana answered for her. "We'll speak our names, out loud, in the center of the town that tried to erase them." Maeve met his eyes. "Even if it gets us killed?" "Especially then," he said. "Names carry power, and I'd rather die known than live hidden." And in that quiet ruin of a stable, they began to plan not their escape, but their emergence, like dawn pushing against the night. They walked into the town square as if it belonged to them. No banners, no weapons, just a woman draped in the cloak of the man who once vanished, and the man who had returned not with fury, but with silence, sharpened to steel. Eli followed behind them like a shadow that had chosen a body again, fists clenched but face held high. The town was already gathering, whispers thick as flies, voices turning sharp at the edges. She came back. He's with her. How dare they? The sheriff stepped forward first, boots loud against the cracked earth. "This is not your place," he called out. "It never was." Kohana didn't look at him. He looked only at Maeve, standing one step ahead, every bruise still visible but no longer shrinking from their eyes. She turned to the townspeople, her voice thin but fierce. "I was born here, worked here, bled on this ground, but none of you ever saw me." A woman near the bakery muttered, "You brought shame." "No," Maeve snapped. "You did. You shamed a woman for surviving. You shamed a man for being kind. You made me believe my body was dirt and his name was poison." Kohana moved beside her. "And still, we return. Not to beg, not to explain, but to remind you, love is not yours to bury." The pastor's voice cut through the crowd. "You're not married. She's broken, and you're not one of us." Kohana reached into his satchel and pulled out something no one expected. A carved piece of wood, shaped into a ring, burnished with fire. "I made this," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Not from gold, from cedar, because it lasts longer, and because it was once alive." He turned to Maeve. "Will you wear it?" She nodded, lips trembling. He slipped it onto her finger. Someone in the crowd spat. Another turned away. But a few others watched in silence, no longer sure if what they were seeing was blasphemy or something holy. Eli stepped forward, chin high. "You said we were nothing," he said to the sheriff. "But I've never felt more like someone." And in the dead stillness of the square, 3 figures stood, not asking permission, not fearing the noise, but shaping something new in the center of a town that no longer knew how to look away. It happened fast, like most things worth remembering. One man stepped forward from the crowd, red-faced and shaking, a former deputy who had lost more than his badge when Maeve had refused him before. He didn't draw a gun. He didn't need to. His words were the weapon. "You think this little show makes you pure?" he sneered. "You were nothing then, and you're less now. You lie with savages, you bring his filth into our square, and you expect us to applaud." Kohana didn't move. Neither did Maeve. But it was Eli, that boy with no blood to claim him, who stepped between them and the man. "She never needed your approval," he said. "Only your absence." The man struck him without warning, the slap echoing louder than the crowd's gasp. Eli hit the ground hard. Maeve screamed. Kohana reached him first, hands gentle, eyes scanning for blood. The man raised his voice again. You see? Chaos follows her. Pain follows him. They're a disease. We cleanse disease. But before he could take another step, the mayor appeared, flanked by 2 ranchers and a woman from the schoolhouse. That's enough, the mayor said. We let too much rot fester already. You're siding with them? The deputy spat. I'm siding with decency, the mayor replied, and I won't watch you beat a child for standing where his mother told him to stand. The word hit harder than any slap. Mother. Maeve's knees nearly buckled. Kohana stood, taller now than the buildings around him, and offered no threat, only a truth. If you tear us down again, he said, we will not rebuild. We will vanish, like you always wanted, and then you'll be left with only your own reflection. The mayor looked around, saw the way eyes had softened, saw children watching from windows, and sighed. You want to be wed? He asked. Then do it. You want to raise a boy that no one else would claim? Then do it. But do it with your heads high. Because if you bow again, they'll come for you twice as hard. Maeve helped Eli stand. Kohana took her hand. And though no church bell rang, and no prayers were spoken, what stood there in that cracked town square wasn't a spectacle. It was a beginning carved from all the endings that should have swallowed them whole. They didn't leave. Not that day, not the next. Maeve moved into the edge of town where the air smelled less of ash and more of open sky. Kohana built their home with his own hands. No hired tools, no charity, just cedar and rope, stone and silence. And Eli, too, became a part of that structure, carrying wood when his arms trembled, learning to hammer without flinching. People passed by and stared. Some spat. But most, eventually, just nodded. The town had run out of reasons to hate that didn't echo back onto themselves. Maeve taught reading to the children who came without their parents' knowledge. Kohana offered fence repairs in exchange for dried corn or flour. They didn't ask for trust. They earned something quieter. The rain came 3 weeks later. Not a storm, not a flood. Just steady drops that soaked the earth and roof alike. Eli danced in it, shirtless, barefoot, joy unrestrained, while Maeve stood in the doorway, hair soaked, laughter cracking from somewhere long locked away. Kohana stood beside her, his arm resting lightly on her shoulder. Not ownership, belonging. She leaned into him. Do you think they'll ever forget? She asked. What they did? What we were? No, he said. But I think they'll stop needing to remember it as victory. She turned to him, then looked past him. A wagon approached slowly. On it, 2 girls clung to a woman too thin to be their mother. Maeve stepped forward. The woman called out, They said you help people. Maeve didn't flinch. Sometimes, she said. Do you need help? They're not mine, the woman admitted. They were left behind. I couldn't leave them too. Kohana emerged, took one look at the girls, then the wagon. We've space, he said. The woman blinked. I can't pay. Maeve stepped forward, reaching for the smallest child's hand. Neither could I once. And just like that, 2 new names began to grow in the soil they'd tilled with pain and patience. That night, as the rain continued to fall, Maeve placed a bowl of stew into each girl's hands and kissed Eli's hair when he passed by. Kohana stood by the door, watching the dark, listening for danger, but finding only the sound of dripping peace. A house had formed, a family had rooted, and the ground, once scorched, began to breathe again. They gathered at sunrise, not by plan, but by rhythm. Maeve stirring the coals from last night's fire, Kohana sharpening an old blade for barter, Eli braiding dry grass into little rings for the two girls who still woke afraid. The wind was kind that morning, brushing over the roof that had once leaked but now held strong. Maeve watched the horizon, expecting nothing, but when the dust cloud rose in the distance, she didn't panic. She only stood and waited. A horse approached, lean and tired, and on its back rode a man she hadn't seen since her wedding day. He wore the same smug mouth, the same belt worn thin from pulling others into misery. "I came to take back what's mine," he said. "You're not married," Maeve said. "You signed no papers. You struck me in public and called me unclean." "You're still my bride by agreement," he hissed. "You think some savage made that disappear?" Kohana stepped forward then, not with fury but silence, hands empty, face calm. The man snorted. "You think he scares me?" But it wasn't Kohana who moved. It was Eli. The boy placed himself between them, small hands trembling but steady. "She belongs here," he said. "To us. Not to you." The man laughed, but then the two girls stepped beside Eli, and then the woman from the wagon came out holding a rake like a spear, and then one by one, others appeared from the edges, quiet settlers who'd once turned their backs but now held them high. "She built this," one of them said. "We watched her. We let her. We needed her more than we admitted." The man looked around, eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this." "We already regretted letting her go the first time," said the schoolteacher. "We won't do it again." With no law to lean on, and no crowd behind him, he turned his horse and vanished down the road like the dust he stirred. Maeve exhaled. Kohana took her hand. Eli smiled. That evening, under the open sky, they sat in a circle. 3 children, 1 woman who had been called barren, and 1 man who had never needed to raise his voice to build a world. The fire crackled, and Maeve whispered, "Do you think we'll be remembered?" Kohana looked at her, then at the flames. "Not for what they did to us, but for what we made with what they left behind." And that was enough.